Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so to show your support for the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. This is a special edition of the Four Boxes Diner because I feel it's essential that I talk about what happened down in Texas. I didn't think this was actually necessary. Of course, to begin with, this was a terrible tragedy. It should never take place, but it's a demonstration that there is evil in the world, and there's been evil in the world since the beginning of time, and there will always be evil in the world. There's no pill or panacea or solution for that, unfortunately. So the question really becomes, is what should we do about this evil? And I want to talk about this, and this is why I'm sort of doing this urgent sort of video, is because I'm concerned that there are many people, even those that are generally sympathetic to Second Amendment rights, that are unfamiliar with firearms, gun control laws, the Second Amendment text, history, and tradition, and therefore I fear they may, by mistake, through unforced errors, negotiate our rights away for what? And that's what I want to talk about here. You see, the issue is, who is going to protect your life and my life? The answer is, we are going to protect our own lives. And the story, which is not the story I think that's being properly told in the media, of course, the story of the Texas shooting is why you and I are our own first responders, why we are responsible for protecting our lives, because the government simply is not going to do it. I want to talk a little bit about the facts on the ground as best as we can tell from news reports that what happened in Texas. First of all, 2 months before the shooting, the police department down there had engaged in active shooter training. Now this is significant because some police departments don't engage in this and they don't know what to do and the protocol is, but down there they did. And according to ABC News, one of the statements that was made by the website that actually helped put together the protocols and develop the active training for Texas police departments actually says, and I'm going to quote here, that first responders to the active shooter scene will usually be required to place themselves in harm's way. That is ABC News reporting on what the Texas active shooter training program that apparently the police department down there in Uvalde, Texas went through 2 months before the shooting. Beyond that, we also now know that the police did not go into the building to try to intercept and stop the active shooter for over 40 minutes. This is particularly egregious. You see, the first sort of active shooting situation in an American school was in Columbine in Colorado. But what happened there is the police did not go in for a very long time in Columbine either. The reason why they didn't do that in Columbine is because the understanding of how police officers are supposed to react to active shooter situations back then was more akin to how to deal with hostages, which means that if there's a hostage situation, you set up a perimeter, you try to negotiate, you try to get the hostages out, and you try to talk the shooter off the ledge, or you kill the shooter if you can. But it was a hostage situation that Columbine was really set up for. But after Columbine, it was clearly understood that in active shooter situations going forward, where somebody is in a school or in a public place trying to kill as many people as possible, it is your job to intercept as soon as possible to thwart that from occurring. Because once you intercept the active shooter, usually they will either kill themselves, or they will give up, or you will kill them. Either way, you need to do that to stop the active shooter, because their goal is not to take hostages and to affect political change or whatnot. Their goal is to rack up the body count, and everyone understands this in the modern era. It's unfortunate. We can talk about in other videos why we think this is happening, but for today, that is the reality of it. So the point is that the police department down there in Texas stayed outside for over 40 minutes. And according to news reports, the active shooter was actually, in and around that property for over an hour before he was finally shot dead. And we know that there was errors made because the incident, because Director Steve McCraw, and again, I'm going to put this link down below, he actually admitted that it was a misjudgment. The wrong decision was made in not going into the school. He specifically said that with the benefit of hindsight, it was the wrong decision, period. Meaning these police officers staying outside the school. And remember, one of the things they actually did is they tried to arrest, and they even handcuffed one of the unarmed mothers that was trying to get into, save her children, or was talking to the police about go in and save the kids. Why are you waiting for these fourth graders to be killed? And she actually got handcuffed, and I think she was eventually let go. But that's terrible that the police on the scene were actually trying to, were seen to be more aggressive in certain respects with unarmed parents than they were with the active shooter. So the bottom line is this. I want to let you know that the lesson of what happened down in Texas is that we need guns to protect ourselves because the government is not going to protect us. That's another example of this, right? No one in that school building had an arm to defend themselves. None of the teachers, none of the administrators that were in that building had firearms and were allowed to shoot back against this, this criminal scumbag that shot up the school. So they relied on and their lives depended on the proper response of the government. And the government, unfortunately, as best as all the evidence shows, they basically screwed up. They screwed up. And now they admit they screwed up now based on some statements, and that's fine, but the reality is it's not going to bring back the lives of the people that were killed there. In my view, as I've expressed on this channel before, that police officers historically are really there to show up with a chalk line and draw a chalk line around your body. They're not really there to intercept and protect you because they get there too late. The old saying, when seconds count, police are minutes away, holds true today. And I want to say that what happened down in Uvalde, Texas, has happened before. And here's just a couple examples that I've talked about in prior books and some timelines, okay? I'm looking at it right here. The Pulse Nightclub shooting in Florida, the SWAT team waited outside for 3 hours before they went in and got the guy. San Bernardino, California, the time between the shooting started and the time they killed the 2 terrorists was 4 hours. 4 hours at San Bernardino. In the Mandalay Hotel in Las Vegas, the guy was shooting for 72 minutes before he was intercepted. And again, we saw this in other instances as well. So the point is that the reality is we need firearms to protect ourselves. And when the police show up, guess what they're carrying? They're going to be carrying handguns with magazines of 17 or more rounds. They're going to be showing up with AR-15 style. Most of those will be select fire, which means you can convert them into an automatic weapon with a twist of the select fire trigger there. They also will be showing up with magazines in those AR-15 style select fire weapons, which hold 30 or more rounds as well. In other words, the police, who know what they're getting into, who have signed up for this duty, are going to be showing up with all the weapons that the anti-gunners want to deny you and me to protect our lives. And why should we as Americans have to give up our rights because of what some psychopathic guy did down in Texas? How are they connected? Why am I paying the price for something that some nutjob does? And the only reason you can say that's appropriate is because the government, Mark, you don't need guns because the government will be there to protect you. But we know based on Pulse, based on San Bernardino, based on Texas, based on all these other situations, the police, if they show up, they're going to show up late. And even if they show up in time to intercept, as we saw in Texas, they may not do so. They may say it's too hard. They may say they're worried about being shot. In fact, there's reports now, this was even on CNN, that one of the police officer spokespeople down there said the reason why the police officers did not immediately go in to intercept the active shooter was because they feared getting shot. Well, we all fear getting shot. Firemen fear getting burned alive in a fire, but that doesn't mean they don't go into the fire. It's your job. You signed up for this. If you signed up to be a police officer, you signed up to go into harm's way. If there's an active shooter situation, you signed up for the job. Okay? And if that is not how you view your job as a police officer, then you should change what's on your door from to serve and protect to, hey, I'm just here looking for a pension. If that's your attitude, and that's how you really shouldn't be a police officer. So if you're standing around for 40 minutes. Now, the other thing that I think we should note here is that have you noticed that how some of them are saying that the police officers breached the building, they breached the room? Now, here's the thing. We know what to breach means. To breach means to actively blow in a door, to actively blow a hole in a wall, and it's like an active verb. To breach something means to attack it, to blow it up, to create a hole, to do something forcefully, to create space so you can run into it, right? Navy SEALs and Special Forces, they breach walls, they breach doors so they can go in and attack. Now, here's the reality. They're using this active verb, we breached the room where the active shooter was. But did they really breach them? Did they? Because based on the reports that I've seen, they waited 40 minutes. Why? Because they needed to get the keys to the room from a janitor. And they didn't breach the door. They took the keys from the janitor. They went over there and they opened the door and they turned the door handle and they opened the door. So that means when I come home at night with my key and I open up my door and I push open the door, I'm breaching my door. I don't think so. So I'm wondering, why are we using the word breach when all you did is you opened up the door? Again, I'm not anti-police, I'm pro-police, I support law enforcement, but the reality is that when it comes to your lives, often the police are just not going to be there. Or you may not get the right police officers. There's some great police officers out there that stepped into, who did great things. And, it sounds like that Border Patrol guy was a real hero, but even him, although he's a hero and I completely applaud what he did, he drove there because he wanted to save his wife and his child. And I completely applaud that, and he did a great job, and I consider him to be a hero. But please remember that what if he didn't have his wife and child there? Would he have driven what apparently was 40 miles or 40 minutes away to the scene? I don't know, because it wasn't even his job to do this. It was the police department's, and he wasn't in the police department. He showed up and helped, great. But why did the guys who were actually tasked with this job do their job? Okay, now I want to talk about what I think. So the real lesson here is, to the extent this story is about guns, it's not about gun control. It's about why we need guns to protect ourselves. It's actually a pro-gun story and not an anti-gun story. Now, the anti-gunners are going to try to tell your typical anti-gun false narratives or misleading narratives, in my opinion. That's what's going to happen, and we're already starting to see it in various ways. And I'm just going to give you a couple ways they're trying to pile onto this. Okay, first of all, for example, you start to see statistics out there that say that, gun deaths is now the leading cause of deaths among children in America, more than automobiles. But then when you look carefully at those statistics, they define children as up to the age of 19. Why is that important? Because we know that those ages of 16, 17, 18, and 19 are the years where you really have a lot of youth, unfortunately so, participating in violent gangs, right? You have all of that gang violence in those in that age of 16 to 19. So by saying that, and I honestly don't think 18 and 19-year-olds are children. They can be drafted, they can go to war, they can get married, they can enter into contracts. I don't consider them to be children, but yet those 16, 17, 18, and 19-year-old gang-related deaths are being counted by certain groups and people as child-related deaths by guns. So that's the sort of, I think, misleading data. The way it's defined is true, but the way they use it, I think, is misleading and sort of deceptive, because when people think of children, they're thinking of little kids like, 8, 9, and 10 years of age. They're not thinking of, 18 and 19-year-old gangbangers when they hear the word children. Now, beyond this, I want to tell you where I think the anti-gunners are going to go. Here's what I think they're going to do. In addition to kind of talking about this misinformation, in my view, it's misinformation. They're going to talk about red flag laws. They're going to talk about denying 18 to 20-year-olds the ability to buy firearms, including so-called assault weapons, which are just rifles, as you know. They're also going to, I'm looking here at the thing here, and they're going to talk about expanding some sort of a background check thing, whatever that is, okay? So the first thing I want to talk about is, whenever you hear the words assault weapons, we know that's a propaganda term. It does not exist. You cannot go into a store and ask for an assault weapon. But the anti-gunners like to use the phrase assault weapon to consider AR-15s, which, as you know, are nothing more than semi-automatic rifles, which are almost certainly protected by the Constitution, because in the Heller case in 2008, semi-automatic handguns, which are responsible for far more deaths than semi-automatic rifles, in fact, of long guns of all types, handguns are used by criminals more than any other firearm, and Heller said it doesn't matter that because law-abiding Americans use semi-automatic handguns for lawful purposes, they are protected arms, and you're allowed to have one. And by the principles of a for shiori, if it's true for the lesser, it's true for the greater. That means if handguns are protected, semi-automatic handguns are protected. It means that semi-automatic long guns, such as AR-15s, should also be protected by the Supreme Court. And for those of you not familiar with this, a semi-automatic pistol or semi-automatic rifle just means that to fire one bullet, you have to pull the trigger one time. That is in contrast to automatic weapons like machine guns, where if you pull the trigger and you hold the trigger, the gun will continue to fire bullets until either you let go of the trigger or it runs out of bullets. Now, this is a critical distinction according to even the United States Supreme Court in a case called Staples versus United States. In the case of Staples versus United States, the court drew a specific distinction between military-style automatic weapons on the one hand and ordinary semi-automatic AR-15 style weapons on the other hand. So even the Supreme Court has recognized this difference. And by the way, do you know how many long guns, and by long guns I mean all rifles in America plus all the shotguns in America, do you know approximately how many deaths they're responsible for in a given year, according to the federal government statistics by the FBI? The answer is usually under 400. Under 400 people die in total from all sorts of long guns, which are shotguns and rifles combined. So we're really talking about a very small perspective, a small number here. Now, let's go beyond that. I think they're going to try to argue that 18 to 20-year-olds should not be allowed to have these quote-unquote assault weapons. We've just talked about how these are not assault weapons. These are semi-automatic rifles like AR-15s. They're not assault weapons. That is a propaganda term. It is not true. It's just made up. Just made up, okay? No different than other things like ghost guns is a made-up term, gun violence is a made-up term. These are propaganda terms designed to dupe urban area professionals who write for these newspapers, who've never touched a gun, into using words and using language that they would not otherwise use because they don't know the difference. So you can easily, in my opinion, kind of dupe them into using this language in favor of gun control. Now, let's talk about 18 to 20-year-olds for a second. 18 to 20-year-olds, the Ninth Circuit has just held in a case called Jones that indeed 18 to 20-year-olds are allowed to have firearms. And that is probably the case under the Second Amendment undeniably. And here's why. The Second Amendment, according to the Supreme Court, is to be interpreted using the text, history, and tradition. Text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment. Well, we know the text of the Second Amendment says you have the right to keep and to bear arms. The right to keep means you have the right to possess, to have the firearms. The right to bear means you have the right to carry guns. They don't mean the same thing because it's the right to keep and the right to bear. Those are two different rights. Now, the question is, who's entitled to the Second Amendment rights? And it's pretty clear it's 18 for many, many reasons. First of all, the text of the Second Amendment refers to the right of the people. Well, 18 to 20-year-olds are clearly part of the people in the United States. When you turn 18, you can be drafted. You have to enlist for the selective service. You can enter into contracts. You can get married. You can buy a car. You can do all sorts of things, obviously, when you turn 18 because you're considered a full-blown adult. And most importantly, under the 26th Amendment, I repeat, the 26th Amendment, you have a right to vote. When you turn 18, you have constitutional right to vote at 18. That was passed in 1971. Why? Because in 1971, we were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and there was upsetness that 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds who were being drafted and sent to Vietnam were upset because they had no say in some states about how the government operated and who should be elected. So they said it's unfair for us not to have the right to vote when we're being sent to Vietnam to die for our country. And that's why the 26th Amendment that says that 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and 20-year-olds have the right to vote as do everyone else who's over the age of 18 in elections. All right, so my view is if you have the right to vote, all these other things, you have the right to keep and bear arms. And that's also the case under the history. Remember, there's a text of the Second Amendment, then there's the history of the Second Amendment. Under the history of the Second Amendment, we know that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds at the time of our founding, at the time the Second Amendment was written in 1791, at that moment in time, we know for a fact that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds were all not just allowed to have firearms and ammunition, they were required to have firearms and ammunition because they needed to have it to bring with them to militia service. Because the way militias worked in 1791 at the time of the founding was that whatever guns and weapons and arms, they didn't just have to be guns, but any arms that you had in your home, in your farm, in your house, whatever it was, you would bring those ordinary, commonly possessed firearms and ammunition to militia duty for musters. So 18, 19, and 20-year-olds under the Militia Act of 1792, and they clearly said that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are covered as militia members under the Militia Act of 1792, 1 year after the Second Amendment. Guess what? They were required to bring firearms and ammunition to them, the militia duty, which meant obviously they had a right to have them because you can't force someone to bring something with them if they don't have a right to have it in the first place. So any attempt to go after 18 through 20-year-old right to have so-called assault weapons is totally a scam, right? It's not only a lie that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are not entitled to the Second Amendment rights like the rest of Americans. It's also a scam because the phrase assault weapons is not true. It doesn't exist. But this is the sort of thing you're going to see. The other thing I think you're going to see are discussions of background checks. All you need to know on background checks, as far as I'm concerned, is that if you are a gun dealer, if you have a FFL, you're obligated under the law to do a background check on anybody that's taken a possession of a gun from you. Because the way the anti-gunners argue it is they say, look, we want to close the gun show loophole. We want to close the internet loophole. There is no gun show loophole. There is no internet loophole. if you buy a gun from a gun dealer, which basically everyone buys guns from gun dealers there, I mean, there's some private transactions, like a father may give a gun to a son, or friends may exchange money for a gun. There are exceptions, but overall, most people, when they buy firearms, are buying it from an FFL gun dealer. And every gun dealer in America is required by federal law to run a background check already. So this background check really is, again, a red herring. It's about trying to show that, hey, we need more gun control because they want to continue to get the nose of the camel under the tent to try to take away our rights. And again, why am I giving up my right? I'm a law-abiding American. You're a law-abiding American. Why do we have to lose our right to defend ourselves and our family because some psychopath does something terrible and then the government doesn't protect us from the psychopath? Why should I give up my right and defend on the government to step into the breach and solve the problem for us when it doesn't appear as if the government does that? I mean, this is the same government, at least at the federal level, that basically, botched the withdrawal from Afghanistan, right? They botched the withdrawal from Afghanistan, embarrassed us in the world space, probably encouraged the Russians. The Russians probably saw how terrible we handled Afghanistan. And they probably said, hey, the United States is not going to be able to mess with us. Look what they did in Afghanistan. And of course, how many billions and billions of dollars in weapons did we leave behind for the Taliban to take over and or to sell to China or to these other countries? Terrible. These are the people that they want us to rely upon to protect me from death and from criminals and from terrorists and not myself. Look, no one cares more about you staying alive than you and your family, okay? Hiring some stranger who's a police officer, maybe a hero, maybe they're great, but as you know, they're not really first responders. You're the first responder because you're the one who's going to encounter the criminal or the fire or the sick person first, and the police, the EMTs and the firemen, they're the second or third responders because they're coming after you. So my point is, why are you giving up your right to keep and bear arms and protect yourself when they're showing up late, even if they try to get there on time? And if they show up on time, they may not even act, as we saw down in Texas. Now, the last thing I think that the anti-gunners are going to laser focus on is this red flag laws. And I'm going to do several videos pointing out why this is a terrible idea. Red flag laws are a terrible idea, and here's why. They are not needed. They're not needed. And why are they not needed? Every state in America has a version of what's called the Baker Act. Now, the laws vary from state to state, but let me tell you how they all basically work. Every state has something called the Baker Act. And a Baker Act is the civil commitment statute that says that if someone you know is a danger to themselves or to others because they're mentally ill, you can go through the Baker Act today. You don't have to wait and pass a law. It's been here for literally decades. You can literally go to the Baker Act and start a civil commitment proceeding to say that that individual is a psychopath, he's a danger to himself, he's a danger to somebody else, and you, judge, should put him or her into a mental institution to civilly commit them, to keep them out of society. That law is in every 50 states right now. It can be used immediately. So the question is, ask yourself, why do the anti-gunners want red flag laws? If you already have Baker Acts, Baker laws in all 50 states, what's the point of the red flag laws, which basically says someone can go make a complaint about a gun owner. It's not really gun owners because it's about the guns. Someone can make a complaint to the police or to a court about the gun owners and take away the person's guns. What's the point of the red flag laws when you already have Baker Act statutes? And I'll tell you the point of it. It's because the red flag laws, in the minds of the anti-gunners, is about doing an end run around the due process and civil protections of the rights of individuals that these Baker Acts usually have in place. What do I mean by that? If I go down the street and I try to get my neighbor, let's say, put in a civilly committed in a mental institution, and I say he's got to go away, I have to go to the court, I have to do certain things, I've got to prove my case with facts, I've got to use lawyers, I've got to use mental health experts that will testify that he or she is insane and needs to be put away for his own safety or her own safety. And here's the thing, that individual who is on the verge of losing his or her freedom because they're mentally ill and have to go into an institution, they get, if they can't afford it, free lawyers paid for by the government, mental health experts paid for by the government. They have a robust due process protections where everyone is looking out to make sure that if you go into a civil commitment mental health institution, you only do so after all of your fundamental due process rights have been respected, and really it's the last recourse. We conclude there's no other approach. You've had lawyers, you've had mental health experts paid for by the government, all this stuff, and judges look very carefully before they take away these rights. So why red flag laws? It's because the anti-gunners don't want to have to prove all of this stuff, and they also, most importantly, in my opinion, they don't want to give gun owners that find themselves ensnared, right, snagged in the net of these red flag laws. They want to make sure you have to pay your bills. You pay your legal bills. You have to hire a lawyer. You gotta write a check and hire a mental health expert to go through your medical records to demonstrate that you're not mentally sick. And all of this stuff, of course, takes place usually after you've lost your guns because someone raised an issue. They complained about you. You don't even know about this. They show up, they take your guns, and then they have a hearing, right? They take your guns, then they have a hearing in many of these cases. To me, it is an end run around existing Baker Act laws, and it's only designed to harass gun owners. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, if you are a danger to yourself or to others with a gun, you're probably a danger to yourself and to others without a gun as well. So you probably should be civilly committed in a mental health institute if you really do have those kinds of problems. Or, of course, at the end of a Baker Act hearing, if a court concludes, I don't think you're a danger to yourself so much that we should take you off the streets forever and put you in a mental health institution, but we want to take away your guns and require you to take medications, well, then the court at the end of the Baker Act hearing, after there's been all these due process protections respected, then the judge at that point could, of course, say, look, I want you to give up your guns. You're going to take this medication. I want you to see these therapists. I'm not going to put you away right now, and I want you to come back in a month. And something like that. There's ways to tailor the remedy once you've been found to be a danger to yourself and to others. All right, so again, this is a quick kind of, obviously I'm not in my usual studio here today, but I thought this information I wanted to get out because I think there's a lot of people that are talking about gun control laws, and these people are in the conservative constitutionalist establishment, but the reality is a lot of them don't know what they're talking about because they're unfamiliar with guns, gun laws, the Second Amendment, any of the stuff. So I wanted to do this video so you really understand, and feel free to send this around to other people so you really understand what's going on here. This is going to be a left-wing fantasy, in my opinion, that if you give up your guns, the government will be there to protect you. But we know from even down in Texas, that is simply a fantasy. At the end of the day, these people are getting butchered by psychopaths and they have no means of defending themselves because they've been denied access to a firearm. And the conclusion is, if you want to talk about Texas as a gun issue, it's a pro-gun issue. A reason why we need guns, because the government will not be there to protect you in most instances when you really need them. So before we negotiate our rights away in the name of having the government there to protect us from evil, I think that's a terrible idea. We need guns ourselves to protect us from evil because no one cares more about our lives than us and our family, and not some stranger who's a bureaucrat or a police officer or some other public safety official that's never met you or your family and wants to go home and collect his or her pension, which unfortunately is the case with a lot of members of law enforcement. Not all of them, but enough of them where I would not be risking my life assuming that the police will show up and do their job at all times, because we've seen too many instances where that just did not happen. Okay, well, I hope you learned something here today. We'll be doing a lot more videos on the Texas shooting and efforts by certain organizations to try to push for different types of gun control in violation of the Second Amendment. So if you haven't subscribed, I hope you will do so here at the Four Boxes Diner.